We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi everyone, welcome to Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Kurt Dalton, the founder of Cannabis.net.
This is Weed Talk News, our weekly look at the news of the week in the cannabis industry, plus a few opinions, and of course another big week in the never-ending story about CBD regulations. Kurt?
And now the big news around New England is Boston now has 2 adult dispensaries, of which you got a private tour before they opened the second one. But there's even bigger news, Jimmy. The largest cannabis company in the world was just created, and Deborah Borchardt is breaking that news. So let's go right to Deborah.
Thanks, Kurt. Thanks, Jimmy. Earlier this week, Curaleaf reported that they had a $34 million offering. Then later in the week, they reported that they closed on their acquisition for Grassroots. They announced this deal a year ago, but it didn't close until this week. Now, having closed on the Grassroots deal, Curaleaf has jumped to the top of the charts for cannabis companies. They will have 135 dispensary licenses and 88 operational dispensaries. We also got earnings this week from Organograms. They reported that their sales dropped to $18 million from $24 million for the same time period last year. And they reported their net losses jumped over 700% to $89 million. The company said that the reason why sales had dropped was that customers wanted more value-priced products, and they had those, but they didn't get them to the shelf until late in the quarter. And then finally, MaryMed lost a round in its battle with the bankrupt Kentucky hemp company, Canad. MaryMed was one of their largest shareholders. Well, they tried to assert some of that power, moving people around in the company. But a judge said since Canad had already sold most of the assets, that MaryMed really had no power. And that is a stark reminder where shareholders stand in bankruptcy cases. That's it for this week. I'm Deborah Borchardt with the Green Market Report for Weed Talk News.
Here's a CBD riddle. When is guidance more confusing than actual direction? Well, that's when the FDA looks at what to do with CBD. They issued guidance on CBD regarding clinical trials this week, but didn't give any guidelines on adding it to beverages or food items. Now, they did give some guidance on research into that cannabinoid, but will now delay further development and clarity in an already confusing situation. Yes, Kurt, they'll open up a public comment period now for 60 days. So, Kurt, I bet you have a comment about this.
Yeah, so you have 2 issues going on right now. You have actual what's called hot hemp. It's when hemp breaks 0.3 on the percentages, and it crosses that line of what the government considers too high, hence it like a marijuana type restriction of which the DEA would be in charge. And then you also have the FDA and DEA doing their ring around the rosy, like we talked about last week, pointing the finger, who's on first, who's on second, call him, call me back, it's him. So you got 2 things going on, but at least there's comments open up now, and at least hopefully it advances CBD in the worst case scenario.
It's like the government just wants to delay as much as possible and study it further and further and further, while there are companies and the economy is just waiting to get an infusion of CBD in their food and beverage products, a product that really doesn't cause any intoxication. I just still shake my head about the federal government.
Jimmy, if I studied this hard, I would have gone to Harvard. But you know what? They are doing their studying. They'll delay this thing as long as they can.
All right, the federal government and the Department of Justice continues to target cannabis businesses. Now, they are suing the California Bureau of Cannabis Control. The DOJ wants that state's bureau to comply with a subpoena on the financial records of cannabis companies, including shipping manifests. Kurt, is this William Barr working behind the scenes or more in front of the scenes?
Well, this is funny because remember the Weed Maps subpoenas as well are going after cannabis company records, interactions between Weed Maps and legal and illegal listings, and shipping records there. So I actually think this is the federal government who's already subpoenaed Weed Maps, now looking at the California Cannabis Control saying, well, let's see what you got. Let's see your records on what you're holding out on. William Barr, obviously not a fan of marijuana. And you're also seeing it in Maine yesterday, Farmington, Maine, getting a big blitz of FBI and federal agents at a place that was blasting across the world. We're the biggest supplier of weed in Maine. So maybe not what you want to be doing, even with a license.
And one more story from the nation's capital. The House of Representatives approved an amendment to let military service members use CBD and hemp products. This comes after a few branches of the military had actually banned it. And now for the rest of the story from Washington, D.C., here's Phil Adams with the Vote Pro Podcast Group.
Hi, this is Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast, here with this week's Weed Talk News DC report. A coalition of cannabis reform and civil rights organizations is urging Congress to pass comprehensive marijuana legislation. The Marijuana Justice Coalition includes the ACLU, Human Rights Watch, NORML, the Drug Policy Alliance, and several other organizations. The coalition is circulating a letter calling on members of Congress to support the Marijuana Opportunity, Reinvestment, and Expungement Act. Since its introduction, the MORE Act, as it's known, has garnered 76 congressional co-sponsors. The bill was approved by the House Judiciary Committee last year. The National Institute of Standards and Technology is launching a cannabis testing program. The program is designed to ensure that the products people purchase at their dispensaries are being accurately labeled. NIST is citing the urgent need for consumers to be adequately informed about the cannabis products they're being sold. The agency will be spearheading a multi-phase project to encourage best practices in lab testing. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell acknowledged that the legal hemp industry has gotten off to what he calls a rocky start. In the press conference on Tuesday, McConnell was asked about the uncertainty hemp farmers face in the absence of FDA guidance. The FDA is currently in the process of developing regulations that could allow for CBD to be marketed as a food item or dietary supplement. McConnell said this remains a top priority for him, saying, quote, "Regulatory certainty from the FDA is necessary for the hemp industry to seize the full potential that this versatile crop has to offer." That's the Weed Talk News DC report for this week. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
So, Kurt, you think Mitch McConnell is rethinking that farm bill he signed into law about 2 years ago?
Well, it's the Pandora's box, right? The hemp plant, the marijuana cousin, the hot hemp that runs with high THC. He was actually the first state to start pulling over truckers, and they couldn't figure out what plant they were carrying across the state line. And now you saw the testing market develop as well, highway testing on certain plants. So he opened the door, and this was expected. But honestly, I hope it pushes things forward for THC because, like you said, the cat's out of the bag. We have to figure out how to test it and get it across the state line, we hope, in the future.
And what was I doing earlier this week, Kurt? Where was I?
So the big news is, not only is Logan Airport a wonderful airport and San Tapio is right next to it, there's a third reason to go to East Boston, and that the second adult use dispensary in Boston has opened up, Berkshire Roots, and Jimmy got a exclusive tour before it opened. Let's check it out.
Add Berkshire Roots to San Tarpio's and Logan Airport as must-visit places in East Boston.
Good morning. Welcome to Berkshire Roots.
Hey, it's Pro Cannabis Media. Can we come in and say hello?
Absolutely, sir. Come on in. How are you today, Jimmy?
Good to see you guys, although I don't recognize you behind your masks.
We are doing our social distancing and proper hygiene here.
The social distancing stickers, because those are going to be the ones that open.
Social distancing stickers in place, hand sanitizers on the counter, masks and advance reservations are all required during this COVID reality. But Berkshire Roots, well, they've arrived in East Boston with shelves filled already to do weed business in Beantown.
Berkshire Roots has two operations, cultivation dispensary in Pittsfield and now this East Boston dispensary. So when the COVID pandemic started, we had to figure out lots of different service styles and making sure we were fanatical, that's the word that I used, about cleaning inside for our personnel safety, customer safety. So now that we're opening in East Boston, we're following all the guidance. We'll have limited occupancy, order online, people will come in, transactions should be fairly quick. We can handle it. We figured it out in Pittsfield. People are really happy with our service in Pittsfield, so we'll do it here really well. It really is amazing that cannabis is an industry. I was not really connected to it until 2014. I was involved in a startup. I co-founded a company. My co-founders were much more into it. I learned so much. That's why I was excited to actually join that startup and, help get it going, because I could see how this was all going to change. Certainly on the medical side, we knew recreational was coming. But to be part of it, to really help my family understand, my friends understand, and now Massachusetts residents understand the benefits, so much more to cannabis than people thought of, obviously, when you and I grew up in the 70s. It's just amazing how much we're learning, but it's still nascent. There's so much more to learn.
You can find Berkshire Roots on Dalton Ave in Pittsfield and now on Meridian Street in East Boston. Check them out online, berkshireRoots.com. Make sure you make a reservation before you show up. And of course, bring your mask. There's a new study out of Yale University's Journal of Biology and Medicine that concludes, quote, marijuana inhalation is associated with short-term reductions in depressive feelings, unquote. 96% of the 1,819 people who participated in this study experienced symptomatic relief from their depression that featured strains that were THC dominant. No disrespect to the researchers here, but duh, why do you think people who use weed call it getting high?
I think we could have figured that out with about $10 and gone to Berkshire Roots and told you I feel a lot better after a pre-roll. But big news too, speaking of sales in East Boston, there's new records being broken for sales north of the border. So let's kick it up to Solomon Israel of MJ Biz Daily to tell us what's the new record in Canada this week.
I'm Solomon Israel from Marijuana Business Daily International, and this is the Weed Talk News Canadian Cannabis Report. Canada's sales of legal cannabis hit a new monthly high in May at nearly 186 million Canadian dollars. The province of Alberta led the way, accounting for a quarter of Canada's cannabis sales, even though it's the fourth largest province. Alberta has the most cannabis stores of any province in Canada, with nearly 500 licenses issued to date. Cannabis grower Organigram saw revenue fall in its third quarter. Organigram's net loss was nearly 90 million Canadian dollars for the quarter ended May 31st. The company has cut its workforce by about 25% as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And Alberta-based Aurora Cannabis is laying off some of its European staff, the company has confirmed. That's part of a major business transformation plan for Aurora, which has already laid off hundreds of workers this year. The company says it's still committed to producing medical marijuana in Europe. You can read those stories and more at mjbizdaily.com. I'm Solomon Israel for Marijuana Business Daily.
According to the new 2020 edition of MJ Biz Daily's Business Factbook, retail sales in the United States will eclipse $15 billion by the end of this year, an increase of 40% from last year. Now, MJ Biz Daily is projecting $37 billion in sales by 2024. You can get your hands on a copy of that great reference book at mjbizdaily.com. Hey, Kurt, did you hear about the Iraq War veteran and Purple Heart recipient from Arizona who was traveling through Alabama?
Gigame.
That means tell you, right? Is that what that is? Okay, so let me tell you about it. So Sean Worsley, who has a medical marijuana card from Arizona, stopped for gas and was playing his air guitar to the music coming from his vehicle. Sure enough, that behavior was enough for a law enforcement officer to approach him and ask to search his car. Now, Worsley, thinking nothing of Alabama laws since he had a legal prescription for medical marijuana, allowed this. That's a bad move. The officer arrested Sean and his fiancée, and they are now facing 5 years in jail. Did you know blacks are 4 times more likely to be arrested in Alabama for possession crimes? This is another reason why Black Lives Matter and why cannabis is a civil rights issue, not a drug issue. Right, Kurt?
He probably should have been arrested for playing air guitar in a gas station parking lot, but that's a ridiculous crime. And let's hope with someone like Steve D'Angelo in Last Prisoner working that gets taken down or reversed, or a judge has some common sense.
It is ridiculous. And, Alabama talks a lot about how well they treat their veterans. But of course, if you're a veteran from another state with a medical marijuana card, you're still going to get busted. Anyway, finally tonight, a kicker. This is what they call it at the end of the news when it's a light story. And this one comes from soccer. Get it? You get it, Kurt? I knew you'd like that. All right, the United Soccer League, which is like the second division of the beautiful game in the U.S. behind MLS, well, they've announced that they have a CBD company as a sponsor. Synchronicity is the product of functional remedies, and their brand will be seen on all USL stadiums. Now, FIFA, you might remember, the world soccer governing body, took CBD off the banned substance list 2 years ago for the World Cup. So once again, Kurt, you're seeing a lot of sports figures and CBD companies getting involved with each other, and the leagues are starting to ease up their, banned substances.
And don't forget our good buddy Rob Gronkowski with his big billboard, until recently, I'm sure, up at Patriot Stadium with his CBD brand right by where the visitors come in the stadium, the visiting team.
That would be CBD Medic and our friend Perry from Abacus Medical. And you know what else today is? And this has nothing to do with cannabis, although Major League Baseball did actually take that off its banned list. So we want to give them a round of applause and say good luck for the Major League Baseball season of 60 games. Kurt, are you going to watch the opener with Mookie Betts, the new $365 million man in Dodger blue?
It gives whole new meaning to the word hitting a doobie. So let's hope there's a lot of doobies hit tonight for the opening of baseball.
I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media. That'll do it for another edition of Weed Talk News. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly.
Weed Talk Now, Weed Talk News, and In the Weeds are all available on most major podcast distributors like iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and our friends at clnsmedia.com and our flagship, Cannabis.net. So subscribe, share, and like our videos on all the social media networks out there, including LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, the WeedTube, and YouTube. Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.